because it was going to be the last, the least, the littlest, the last, the lost, the least, the littlest, and the dead. And she said, I don't think that's a good idea. So your office administrator is working double time, keeping track of the pastor and keeping the pastor on track. Anyway, where are we at here? Not spent, neither empty. So we have an amazing picture today of God's providence, God's giving, at this place where God gives, but then God also, at the right moment, blesses those who put their faith and trust in Him. And the thing that's hard is that we don't always feel that blessing immediately, or as immediately as in this story today from the book of Kings, the story of Elijah and the widow. Elijah's been on the lam in the book of Kings. He's been on the run because he's being hunted by Ahab and especially Jezebel, the king and queen, I guess, of Israel. And because, he told them what they were doing was wrong, and they didn't like to hear that. So he was hiding in the wilderness, being fed by ravens in the last chunk of 1 Kings, and near a brook that had plenty of water until the drought that he proclaimed would be over the land finally dried up the brook, and he had to move on to someplace else. And so in this place of lack, of want, God sends him to a widow. Now, we know widows. There are some widows here. And it's sometimes a difficult situation to be in. In the first century, in anywhere in the ancient world, not just Israel as described in the Bible, but anywhere in the ancient world, it was a difficult situation because you depended upon the man to go out and do some work, and it was part of a household unit, or maybe your children if they were old enough to help support and care for you, because there weren't a lot of places in society where you could provide that support for yourself. It just didn't fit in the first century or in the ancient world for most people. So being a widow, which is, you'll hear about that often in the Bible, is often a place of destitution, of extreme want and very tenuous living situation. And so here's Elijah, out in the wilderness being fed by ravens and the water in the brook, and it's all gone, and God says, I want you to go to a widow in Zarephath. Let's see, couldn't you send me to the governor's house and I could get good food and stuff? No, go to a widow. But Elijah just does this. As the prophet sees, he goes and sees this woman and says, get me water. When she says, that's fine. Kind of reminds you of Jesus at the well. And he says, get me some water. And then he asks, right, oh, and bring me a morsel of bread by your hand. She says, I got nothing. What I got left, I'm going home to bake a cake, and me and my son are going to eat it, and we're going to die. That's it. This is the end of everything right here. This, what I have to cook with, that's our last bit of food. I have nothing. I have no money. I have no food. I have no hope. I have no help. She is one of the last, the least, the lost, the littlest, and the dead. And yet she goes, right? She gets him the water. She goes and she bakes the cake. He says, do it, and the oil will not run out, and the meal will not be spent, right? You're always going to have enough during this time. And she goes and she does it, and she bakes a cake, and she brings it to him. Presumably she brought him the water. And miracle of miracles, there's plenty for, it describes her son, and her household. I noticed that I never saw that before, and it jumped out at me this time. It was not just her and her son, but the text says her son, and her household. Whatever it is the servants or other family members or who knows, whoever else is there, that she as a widow really normally has no means to provide for even herself, not to mention a bunch of people. So now there's a household that's being fed in this miraculous manner as the prophet promised when he spoke the word of God. Right? And so her trust not in the prophet, but in the words of the prophet, which are the words of God, results in everybody having enough for that time. Which brings us to our other widow. 2 widow stories, right? Jesus and the disciples are hanging out in the temple. Now remember, the temple is not just a building, it's a 40-acre, at least 40 acres, maybe bigger than that at this point, but Herod has done to it. 40 acres of land on top of a hill prominent point, and has a wall around it, and then inside that wall, right, is what's known as the court of Gentiles. So people who are not Jewish are allowed inside the wall, but no further, because then there's another wall, and inside that wall is called the court of women, because women are allowed that much closer to the temple, but no further. And then there's the court of men, which is inside the temple, and then there's the Holy of Holies, which is inside the temple. Well, the court of men is outside the temple and inside the temple. It includes the temple. And then the court of the Holy of Holies is the very center of the temple, which only the high priest goes to. So you got Gentiles, women, men, and then the high priest. And the high priest goes to where the Ark of the Covenant is. Okay? So that's the order of things. So Jesus and the disciples are hanging out in the outer part, in the court of women. So Gentiles to women, right? And this woman, Jesus points out this woman who comes along, to make her offering. Now, for a lot of people, making their offering was a big deal, especially for some of the religious people, as is recorded by historians like Philo. They would come and they would make a very big deal. There were 13 collection vessels, 13 in the court of women. They were made out of metal, and they were like trumpets, or huge flowers, think a tuba, right? And they that metal funneled down into a box, and the box was locked, and that's where they'd keep it. There were 13 of those. In my notes, I had the list of what they were, but they were for different aspects of the ministry. How many of them? 2 of them were for the temple tax, because men going into the temple had to pay the temple tax, an entrance fee, half shekel. Then there were 5 of them that were for various needs, like wood or pigeons, small birds to be offered, or other things that they used for the worship. And then the remaining 6 were for free will offerings, whatever you wish to give in thanks to God for God's blessings on you. And of course, people who were wealthy, which included people like the Pharisees and the scribes and the other leaders and the important people of town, would come often and bring their money. Now, because they don't have paper money, they don't have debit cards, they have coins. Copper coins, brass coins, silver coins, gold coins. You could only use a Tyrian silver coin from Tyre to pay the temple tax in the first 2. All right, but you had these other coins that you could make offerings in these other vessels for other purposes, offerings to God. And of course, now think about this. There's this big metal thing that's shaped like a big funnel, big trumpet. You throw coins in there, what's it going to do? Okay. If you throw a lot of coins in there, what's it going to do? Make a lot of noise, right? So people with a lot of money would come by and they'd dump their coins in and it'd make a lot of money. It makes them, everybody looks, oh, that's so-and-so, that's, So there was this sort of recognition. This widow comes into that scene. No one with her. There's no group of people. There's no nothing. She's coming by herself. There's probably other widows too. Why Jesus picked this widow, I don't know, but she comes in. And in her faithfulness, she comes in to put her 2 coins in. Now, these coins are called, in Greek and Latin, they're called leptons. I can't remember the Hebrew name. I don't remember, but leptons. They were basically 1/100th of a denarius. What's a denarius? A day's wage for a laborer. So 1/100th of a day's wage. She put 2/100ths of a day's wage. That was all she had to live on. All she had left. She put it in. She was moved to put it in. But it's nothing. 2/100ths of a day's wage. I mean, the Bible translated, I think, is a penny or something like that. I mean, it's not. Can't buy you anything. But that was all she had. She put these 2 small coins in. And Jesus turned to the disciples and said, that woman has just put in more than anybody else in the temple. No one noticed her. No one heard her gift because it made virtually no noise in this cacophony of this big public space. And yet Jesus says she put in more because of the faith and trust in God that went with that offering. So it's her heart and her love for God that, from God's perspective, determines the value of how big the bag is or how much noise you make when you dump it in or whatever. Some people who went up would even have a slave with them to blow a trumpet when they made their little deposit so people could see. 2 coins just making her way through this scene and in. Which brings us at last to her faith and trust, and the faith and trust of the first widow brings us at last to the letter to the Hebrews, and our reading from that today, where we are reminded that through Jesus Christ, God has already paid our largest debt. He's paid our sin debt on the cross and made it possible for us to know forgiveness, to feel the depth and breadth of God's love, and to share in eternal life with Him through the cross. We know that we've been given that gift. Jesus made Himself an offering so that we might receive the greatest blessing ever. And in that, we can only rejoice and be reminded that in the Lord's Prayer, right, we begin with, hallowed be thy name, thy kingdom come, thy will be done. Give us this day our daily bread. God has given us our daily bread. And for that, even as the Lord's Prayer begins, we remember and know that we can never repay that and only give thanks and praise to the one who made us and who will receive us on that great day.